Shalom, welcome to the Jewish View. My name is Rabbi Nachman Simon with the Chabad House of Damar, together with my co-host Mark Ronich of jbiztechphilly.com and Statewide News Service.
And now I
Yeah.
have a column once a month in the Jewish press.
All right, Mazel Tov for your growing and
It's called the
becoming one of-
Albany Beat.
All
So
right,
we're gonna
we'll
beat
look
the
forward
drums.
to there. Anybody
So-
gets the Jewish press.
That's right. And we have a very special guest with us, a return guest, Assemblyman Walter Mosley, who's a very young, energetic, dynamic assemblyman from Crown Heights.
Yeah.
So-
Well, first thing
Thank
we
you.
have to do is give you a Mazel Tov for being reelected.
Thank you, thank
That's
you,
also
thank you.
one
And the
thing.
birth
you,
of
Rabbi.
your birth of your child
Yes,
since you were
Mark.
here.
Yes,
5
yes,
months.
5 months,
All right,
August
there you go.
1st,
And is
last
that
year.
a boy or a girl?
Girl.
Girl.
So I have a son who's going to be turning 8 and my daughter who's 5 months old.
Wow, and you're how young?
I'm not that young.
Yeah.
I'm 48.
48.
Yes.
You're
That preserved
Still a
well.
young guy.
preserved well, yeah, but that's great.
Assemblyman, you know that you are the Assemblyman for the Crown Heights area, and that's close to our hearts because I'm from the Chabad Hasidim and 770 Eastern Parkway, which is in Crown Heights, is the headquarters of Chabad. So therefore, you're the Assemblyman for a lot of Jewish people in Lubavitch Hasidim, and therefore we'd like to tune in on a good few issues that are concerning them. Well, anyway, that's your district.
Correct.
One of the things is, that they're concerned with, of course, is all their children go to private schools and not to the public schools, and therefore it's a very big burden. I don't know if people on our viewers know about the burden that not only you're paying taxes, which of course goes to the public schools, which was right. On the other hand, they have to pay a double tax, so to speak, because they're paying for their own children,
Correct.
which is not being supported from the school. There is some support, but is there any other ways to help these parents out of this double burden?
Well, again, thank you for having me on Jewish View again. And as you are well aware, the piece of legislation that was carried and continues to be carried by Assemblymember Cusick from Staten Island is a bill that is still outstanding. It was something that was thought to be carried possibly last year, but was tabled by the governor at the very last minute. I think it was almost the last or next to last day of session. But it's something that our colleagues, and I can speak for myself, we continue to ask about what is the new narrative, because if we want different results, we have to have a different approach. The one thing I tell those who are advocating for this piece of legislation, which I signed on to, as one of the first pieces of legislation I did sign on to as a new member in the 237th legislative session. And then obviously we also talk to our advocates at NYSET and UFT to get them to the table, because ultimately we know that every child, regardless of their religious affiliation or cultural background or color, requires a quality education. They call the budget a moral document. I think we call investing in our education the conscience of our conscious document, or conscious act in our efforts to invest in the future of New York State. So that is something that continues to be debated behind closed doors in sidebar conversations. But I think that if we continue to have a line of communication open between the synagogues and the other schools like the Roman Catholic schools and school that I went to a not to a parochial school, but I went to a Montessori school. These are people who I represent, who are in schools and institutions that are in my district, and who I want them to thrive, and I want those kids to do well, so that they can, be quality citizens of our city and of our nation, and that they should be given every consideration as if they go to a traditional public school.
So I saw you recently at the State Education Board of Regents meeting.
Yes.
And you were acknowledged for something that had to deal with Central Brooklyn at the meeting. Could you explain what that was about? Or?
Well, Mark, as you know, I've tried to make it to every Board of Regents meeting, whether we're in session or out of session. They meet, monthly. And to me, I think that it is imperative that my colleagues take a more active role in their participation. It's one thing to view those meetings online, which they are streamed, but it's another thing for the regents to get to know you, to get to know the information that they're talking about, whether it be publicly or or not publicly, where you get some further information that could be relevant to your district or to the communities in which you serve. But we also know about the new Pathways to Graduation initiative that the regents voted on, and that will be implemented later this year. And what I was able to do is to take that information. The public comment period, I think, was set for late December. So in knowing that and that deadline, myself, along with several of my colleagues in Central Brooklyn, had a time in which we had a symposium for the community to not only inform them about this new Pathways to Graduation for our high school students, which I think it's really creative and out of the box, but also to allow them to offer their public comments and for us to memorialize them and to get that subsequently to the Acting Commissioner Berlin's office and to Chancellor Tish's office, so that they know where we stand in terms of not just supporting it, but also concerns about making sure that the implementation is system-wide, and that we will always make that a priority to make sure that the Pathways Initiative is looking to make sure that all schools have the ability to participate in this program. So that was acknowledged at the last meeting this past week, and we're grateful for the opportunity to do so.
So the Pathways to Graduation can you explain that program?
Well, traditionally, we have a traditional way of getting you for a high school student to matriculate and to eventually graduate with a high school diploma in New York State, where they have to pass the more traditional regions. Now, what is being implemented is that there will be other ways in which a student can go off the beaten path and garner a regent's or qualify his or her regent standards by taking on in other regions that they will probably be more inclined to be attracted to. So it would,
instead of having the two social studies regions, this is like you can opt out of one social studies region.
you can opt out of one, and then there's
and
others.
then use this
Other multiple
regions.
pathway to
Right.
qualify. We've heard horror stories where students are being accepted to colleges all throughout the country, and they can't
Right.
accept their acceptance letter, or they can't reply to the acceptance letter because they have failed to not be able to pass one particular regions for whatever reason. So we're glad that the Board of Regents is stepping out of its box and looking at ways in which they can attract students to education from a non-traditional pathway.
I think that's incredible because, we're, of course, in the Capital District here, and we have a superintendents of different school districts, and one of the big issues, of course, is the dropout rate.
Yes.
And
That's right.
I think that's like you're trying to say, and these people are finally getting that they're being creative, of graduating children. They don't need, everybody doesn't need trigonometry.
Correct.
There's different ways that they can graduate with a good education without, like you're saying, staying in the box or their regiment. Not everybody's ready for the regiment, but they're intelligent if you give them things to, again, that'll stimulate their minds instead of just being regimented.
Exactly.
It'd be better for them.
Exactly.
And I noticed that from your bio and your website that you were born in Crown Heights.
I was born in Maimonides. Then my mom lives at 591 Crown Street. And so I stayed there till like I was like 8, and then we moved to Clinton Hill. But I mean, obviously,
It's still the district.
it's still a district, and I still went to my grandparents' home often.
So that's terrific that you came, that you stayed. I mean, most people just travel on and they move on when now the travel is, you can connect with family so much easily.
Correct.
Now. People often move away, but it's great to see that you stayed and that you're
Definitely.
here. You're interested in the education part of your community and of your career, but there's also on the downside the crime rate in Crown
crime
Heights.
is always a big issue.
And we unfortunately had this shooting at 770 Eastern Parkway, the Lubavitch Headquarters, World Headquarters, and it's one wacko gunman you know. But I know that one of your first votes was for the SAFE Act.
Correct.
And you've always been on this gun safety kick. That's been one of your mantras.
Yes.
So what can you say about any of this in terms of this crime hitting so close to home?
Well, the first thing I want to commend the governor for taking a leap of faith in terms of pushing this piece of it wasn't a very popular piece of legislation when it was pushed through the New York SAFE Act, because it was one of the first measures that I voted on. I think it might have been the first or second week in which I was actually I received it, and we voted on it. Is it perfect? No. Not too many pieces of legislation can say they're perfect. But at the same time, we understood that, and Rabbi and I were talking about acts of terror and the instruments that are used to commit these acts of terror. We must govern from the head and stop governing from the tail.
Right.
And I think the New York SAFE Act was a prime example of us governing from the head. I think that it's unfortunate that what took place in the district.
At 770?
Yeah, 770 did take place, but at the same time, I think that with this piece of legislation being passed into law two plus years ago, I think it definitely has curtailed the amount of violence, particularly the amount of gun violence that we see being perpetrated throughout the world.
You share the Crown Heights community with Kareem Kamara?
Yes.
Okay. So the actual building, 770, was that in Kareem's district or
That
yours?
is in Kareem's district.
Kareem's
Assemblyman
district.
Kamara's district, yes.
But isn't there...
But we have
you
residents
have,
who
exactly.
live all throughout North Crown Heights, which I represent, who
So
go
I'm
there.
just... But what was your reaction when you heard about the shooting and it hit home? As you were born there, this is not you're just not moving in and then running for office and then finding that this is your home.
Yeah.
And you hear about this violence that was known worldwide now.
Yeah, you pray for the victim, that they recover, and you pray for their family.
And he did.
And you pray for his mom and his mother, who had to come all the way from Israel to hear that type of news, and then to carry that news all the way in your travels here to America.
What was your role in this? How did you insert yourself for calm and to ask for peace? Or how did you insert yourself?
Well, one thing is when you want to make your statements publicly known, that you stand with the residents, and you stand with those who wish to study here, who wish to live here, who wish to work in my district, that they are able to do so in a safe environment. Well, at the same time, we want to make sure that any form, and at that time we did not know if it was perceived to be an anti-Semitic act committed, and so we wanted to make sure that any level of intolerance is not to be, it will not be tolerated in our district.
Intolerance not tolerated.
Exactly. So those are the things we wanted to make sure that, and show a unified voice within our district, just like when we talked about, people who were being assaulted with that knockout game a little more than 2 years ago. We all came together, myself, Dov Hyken, Assemblyman Hyken, District Attorney Ken Thompson. The same thing was true for this attack. And in lieu of what is taking place all throughout the world, when it comes to those types of acts, we can never, ever hesitate in our ability to come together. Was
there someone maybe in the Lubavitch community who came to you and said, we'll take care of this ourselves, we don't,
No.
Did they seek help? Did they say we need more security? Did they ask you for anything then?
I don't think they ever, personally, me, no. They didn't
Can't speak for someone else.
I can't speak for anyone else. But there was never a hesitancy amongst the elected officials in the area to show that level of support for the family and for the community at large. We know that, speaking for myself, I grew up in that neighborhood. I grew up with those dynamics around me. So to me, it's second nature. Unfortunately. Yeah. And in terms of the level of community that's there.
The shootings are unfortunate part.
The shootings are unfortunate,
and I'm sure you grew
obviously
up around
we don't like to ask for a form of unity when it comes around something like that. But at the same time, I know that given all that we've gone through in Crown Heights, that this is a stronger community. I think it's a community that relies upon other members of the communities for support, for assistance, and just a shoulder to lean on when we're going through hard and difficult times. So to me, I think that we're at a point in time in Central Brooklyn, particularly in Crown Heights and in North Crown Heights for me, where the community is stronger than ever. And I'm looking forward to working for them and for all my constituents.
So what's your,
Well, just on
Yeah.
that note, but there is legislation for more, excuse me, for more security. That's what you were going to ask.
no, go right ahead. Yeah.
Just idea of the security
the
from the
grants.
state, grants and state. I don't, exactly, I mean, the police department's doing a wonderful job, but I
Correct.
don't know what else do they want.
Well, I haven't heard of any legislation in particular. I don't know if it's being drafted or it's been recently introduced. I know we have not. This is our official first week, which it's our second week, and it was primarily ceremonial.
Right.
But I think
The first month is a giveaway. Basically,
next
the
week
first
when,
month
we
we
go
don't.
for the state of the state
Right.
/ budget
budget.
report.
Isn't that amazing? That's surprising, isn't
We'll
it?
start to hear more. We'll start to see more memos circulated for legislation. So I'm looking forward. If there's a piece of legislation out there that will promote this cause, I definitely will be 100% behind it.
So it's amazing that we're going to have the state of the state and the state budget delivered at the same time, because most of the time, in all the other years, it's always been the state of the state, and then 2 weeks later the budget, and all the elected officials that I would always talk to would tell me, well, this was a nice speech, but how's he going to pay for it? And 2 weeks
Exactly.
later, so now we get it all in one. Now I want to know what the responses will be when they can't say, well, let's see how he's going to pay for it.
Right.
So this is going to be very interesting.
It will be an interesting address. I think that the governor, in lieu of the fact of his father's passing, we lost a week, understandably so. So I think it was prudent for the governor to combine both addresses. I think it saves us time in terms of our ability to negotiate and have hopefully an on-time budget for the fifth year in a row, as well as dealing with some of the other ancillary concerns and issues that might have to be dealt with in the budget process, as opposed to going through a full-blown legislative process. So I'm happy to hear that the governor's taking that on.
Could be, talk about thinking out of the box. This could be a regular trend. There's nothing that says there has to be a state of the state and then 2 weeks later a budget. There has to be a budget presented, but he could do the both at the same time.
I think it hopefully will be a trend, because like you said, people usually say, I like this address, but the real address comes in another week when we
So
hear
this
about the budget.
could be a blessing in disguise, huh?
Could be. It could be the final act that was really promoted by his father indirectly.
Yeah.
Even in his death, he's shaping policy.
Absolutely. Did you get a chance to meet Mario Cuomo?
Yes, I've met him a couple of times. I met him and his lovely wife Matilda. The last time I met them was last year at a function for the Jackie Robinson Foundation in the city, and him and his wife were there, and it was a pleasure meeting him. And that was the last time I met them.
Was that the first time, or when was
no,
the first time?
I met them at another function. I believe it was a county function, state-wide county function. I just met him at that time.
Yeah.
But I was able to meet him and his wife for the first. I met his wife for the first time at the Jackie Robinson Foundation.
How did you see him aging in between the two times you saw him? Because I knew him from when he was first elected. I knew him when he was lieutenant governor.
Right.
So I couldn't believe how much he had aged when I saw him on stage at the State Democratic Convention.
Right.
That was the last time I had seen him. So, I was shocked. But what was your reaction to him?
Well, like any son, when you see your parents age, it's an age before your eyes. It's always comes as a disappointment, because you always view them you revere them in such a way, and you've always known them to be strong individuals who defended you, who brought you in the world and raised you. So just like any parent or any child looking at a parent, I consider him someone who parented the state through some very difficult times.
Well, it was the family of New York and Decade of the Child. So you talk
Exactly.
about parenting. That's an apt.
So
that's an apt
it was sad to see, but you know that Father Time loses to no one.
I can't believe how thin he got towards the end. I mean, I just kind of you know, it was eerie.
Yeah, it's like
But I really have a lot of fond memories
Certainly.
of Mario Cuomo.
Certainly.
And I wrote about it on my website, so you can go check
All right, I'm
about
gonna
it.
check it out.
Okay. What do you expect to see for the upcoming session in your crystal ball?
Well, given the dynamics and the composition of the legislature in terms of the Senate majority, the true majority being the Senate, controlled by the Republicans,
Yeah.
I think that in hindsight, it might be a blessing in the sense that we know exactly where they stand. You know, we're not confused. There's not a fourth man in the room. There are 3 men in the room. We know one house is controlled by Republicans, one house is controlled by Democrats, and we have a governor who really, I think, owes a lot to Democrats throughout the state, but primarily in the downstate region, to his reelection, given his opponent's success throughout the state, particularly in the western and the north country, in winning those counties. So I think, and in lieu of what he said at his father's eulogy, in terms of making New York a better place for all New Yorkers going forward, I think that he carries with him this mantra of making good on that promise. And I think that this legislative session, a lot will be determined in this budget. And it will be a task to have an on-time budget for this year, because there's so many things up for grabs in terms of education reform, in terms of the budget, as we fund education going forward, as it relates to rent regulation laws, the DREAM Act, in terms of immigration reform. So we have a lot of
big thing that you have $5 billion and you have to figure out how to spend it.
how to spend the $5 billion.
Mario Cuomo always said that it was the years when you're lean and you don't have a surplus are the easier budgets to pass, because everyone just wants to get the heck out of town.
Correct.
It's when you have a surplus and everyone wants a piece of the
Everybody
pie.
wants a piece of the pie.
You know, and they say, "Oh, we've been dry for so long," that they say, "Oh, we need this.
Do you have
we need
ideas
this
what
money."
you-
But the
certainly.
$5 billion surplus is really a one-shot.
Right, exactly.
Because
it's not a
it was a settlement.
It's not a reoccurring.
So it should be used for one shot.
Exactly.
So do you have your preferences of what, or can you tell the audience what those one shots?
Well, we're having meetings
Might
right
be.
now with members. In fact,
Well,
I had
infrastructure is one.
Infrastructure is one. Economic development in terms of and workforce development is 2, and then housing is 3.
Really, those aren't ongoing issues?
Well, there's certain things that you can put in, and it could be the jump start of something much bigger.
You say about housing, I mean, because I just know, and again, I have children living in Crown Heights. For anybody who knows about New York, the real estate is just sky high. So I guess if you're invested, you're making a lot of money. But if you're just starting off in life or you don't have a home, it's very difficult. Is that what you're dealing when you say about housing?
Housing,
I mean, just to go low
because
cost
remember,
housing.
you have to understand, the $5 billion comes from the housing stock that was caught up in the predatory practices that caused our economy
foreclosures.
to collapse.
Okay.
So we have to understand, this money didn't just come from thin air. It came from, unfortunately,
Chase.
those who had to suffer through
Well.
that era in which.
Well, so it's like Chase, Bank of America, they all gave in the money that
Exactly. So
paid for the.
to me, I think that it has to.
Go
We have to
back
form.
to
We
the-
have to at least put a portion of that back into the housing stocks.
Well, when
that
you say
that we have.
housing, do you mean home ownership?
Well, it
Or
can,
do you-
it can go into home ownership in terms of making sure that those who have their homes, who are going through foreclosure issues and concerns, making sure that they have resources and lawyers that are available to them. Whether we're talking about creating further incentives so that Mitchell-Lama housing remains Mitchell-Lama. We've lost nearly a third of our Mitchell-Lama homes just from 2013.
And briefly, Mitchell-Lama is rent stabilization?
It's rent stabilization, but it was a state project that was that was done back in the 60s and 70s, where the state actually was in the business of creating and building affordable housing.
Because there's Mitchell-Lama housing in Syracuse.
Yes,
It's not just
Mitchell-Lama
all-
housing all
it's-
throughout the state. It's a state program.
Right.
So.
But it's mostly concentrated in New York City.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
Exactly.
And what else do you see coming down besides the budget and the surplus, in terms of issues that you would like to have addressed, talked about?
Well, I think we kind of indirectly touched upon it, the 421A
Yeah.
tax abatement and reduction program, a program that was created back in the 1970s when we were in a very different place as a state and as a city.
So is that an education thing?
No,
or
it's a
421?
tax abatement and reduction program that was put in place for developers to build affordable housing and to build in general the housing stock back when we were back in the 1970s where we needed that stimulus to create housing for New Yorkers.
It's interesting you didn't mention about the eliminating the gap elimination gap or whatever it's called, gap elimination funding or accountability, and that they took the money, from schools several years ago to balance the budget, but now people are saying, well, we want it back in to make the budget whole. Do you think that should be eliminated, the gap elimination?
To be honest, a lot of individuals still see campaign for fiscal equity as a big
Right.
issue, particularly here in the city. And
And I do.
unfortunately, we have an investigation that the federal government is conducting as it relates to the funding stream for area school boards throughout the state, and figuring out whether there was a level of fairness and equity as it relates to that. So we have some very concerning issues as it relates to that. And to add to that, obviously, we have to find a new commissioner for the Department of Education.
Right.
So, we have a lot to take care of in
In
terms of an
education,
educational standpoint.
It's really in a state of flux because there are about 5 regions that are up for
There are
consideration.
5 regions, and there are 2 open seats. There's an open seat in Westchester, and there's an open
Well,
seat in
the
Queens.
open seat in Westchester is just this guy retiring,
Right.
Phillips,
Right.
Harry Phillips. But there was another seat that's still that's vacant where the person isn't there anymore.
Right.
So there's
Right, you have those 2 open seats and the 5 seats that are up for renewal.
So there's 7 seats.
Correct.
And so then the commissioner. Boy,
And the commissioner.
this is going to have a whole new look.
Yeah, thank God that I have, going to the board, those regions
Yeah.
meetings is
Assembly,
critical.
the assembly, what does the assembly have to do with the regions people? I'm
Well-
just asking just a basic civics question.
No, well, we do have a process by which the assembly, because we so outnumber the Senate, have the ability to interview those individuals who are brought
And you
before
vote
us.
on it, it's your
And we
vote?
vote on that.
It's a joint session of the state legislature that convenes to vote on the regents and the commissioner. And the regents' positions are up on March 31st. So the end of February, they go through this dog and pony show, essentially, in the legislature of interviewing candidates. And they pick from one of those candidates. But what we saw happen for the Albany district was that they didn't like any of those candidates,
But every
so they
district
picked.
has another
It's a
region
judicial
still again?
district. It's a judicial district.
All right.
So it takes in several counties. Each judicial
Has a
district
representative.
has a representative,
Right.
and then there are some at-large regents who serve on behalf of the whole state. So there's a combination. And right now, there's really, I was looking at it yesterday, the only Jewish regent is Chancellor Tisch. There's really no other Jew on the Board of Regents, which I found wow, I didn't realize this.
people are
So
so into
hopefully there'll be
education,
because the Jewish community is so interested in education, it would be interesting to see if maybe someone who's Jewish will pop up and be able to
And-
take
and
over.
you-
But what I'm saying is that, all of a sudden in the Albany district, we didn't have, they didn't like anyone, so they pulled someone in from Sullivan County,
Yeah, really.
where Shelley Silver has a summer home, and this process is really controlled by the Speaker and the Assembly, because the Senate, there's 63 members, there's 150 members in the Assembly. So you combine them together, the Democrats in whole outnumber the Republicans in whole. So the Senate Republicans say, we represent a larger district. So the senators should have 2 votes, not 1. And the Assembly says no, because they don't want to give up their power. So the Senate Republicans essentially boycott all these regions' votes, and it really falls into the Assembly the Assembly bailiwick. And it's a whole long discussion as to, why the legislature chooses this. It's a state constitution has it in.
Which makes it all the added more important that legislators should be involved
Right.
in activities in which the regions are taking part in on a monthly.
How did I do
monthly.
explaining that? Was that
Did a great job.
Better than-
Perfect. Perfect. I think
Better
anyone
than
who's
you would
viewing
want
this
to.
knows the breakdown. Yeah. It knows the inside baseball as it relates to how we select Board of Regents members.
So, and I was, so I really think that's one thing to keep an eye on, and that we'll see what we could
Surely,
do.
if there's so many positions up,
Yeah.
it's going to really change
Certainly.
everything.
So I think we're out of time.
We're out of time. That's unfortunate, but with that, since you're part of the new session, then you have a good few years, and we give you a blessing, of course, to continue
very
on, and not only the same, but even rise higher and do more good for the people of New York and Crown Heights.
All
Thank
the
you.
best of
Rabbi. Thank you,
success.
Mark.
Okay.